It was a cold winter evening in 2024 when the nation received news that shook the political landscape. Donald Trump, once the 45th president of the United States, had officially announced his candidacy for president again. Many thought his time had passed. After losing the 2020 election, Trump had retreated from the spotlight, leaving the world wondering if his political career was truly over. But here he was, once again, standing at the front lines, ready for a battle that no one had expected. The news hit the media like a bombshell. The pundits, the political analysts, and even his harshest critics couldn't believe what they were hearing. Is this a joke? Some asked. Others believed that he was just seeking attention, unable to accept that he'd lost the presidency. But as the days went by, it became clear that Trump wasn't just seeking attention. He was preparing for war. His announcement came at a time when the country was facing deep divisions. Political tension was at an all-time high. The economy was struggling, and trust in the government seemed to be crumbling. Many Americans, particularly those who felt abandoned by the system, were looking for a leader who could take them out of the chaos. They didn't want a traditional politician. They wanted someone who would shake things up, someone bold enough to challenge the status quo. In the midst of all this, Trump's name rang like a bell. He was the man who had promised to make America great again, and his return was promising to be even bigger than before. But why did he return? What was it that made him think he could reclaim the highest office in the land? His supporters had never wavered. They remembered the promises he kept during his first term. They remembered the jobs created, the economy boosted, and the sense of patriotism he inspired. For them, the fight wasn't over. The dream was still alive. Trump's return was a symbol of hope for them. To his loyal base, he wasn't just a politician. He was the embodiment of their frustrations, their dreams, and their unrelenting belief in what America could be. But Trump's comeback wasn't just about a single campaign. It was about a message. He wasn't simply fighting for the presidency. He was fighting for the people who had been ignored and silenced for too long. They were the working-class Americans, the ones who felt that the political elites had forgotten them. Trump's return promised them something more than a political leader. It promised them a voice. Many questioned whether he could pull it off. His legal troubles had mounted in the years after his presidency. The courts were after him. Several ongoing investigations into his business dealings and political decisions threatened to derail his bid for the White House. Trump had been indicted multiple times, but he remained confident. He used the courts and the media to his advantage, claiming that these legal battles were part of a larger political war against him. To his supporters, it was just more evidence that the system was rigged. And yet, despite the odds, the first signs of Trump's comeback were undeniable. His rallies, which had been a cornerstone of his first campaign, were bigger and louder than ever before. Thousands of supporters packed stadiums, waving flags and chanting his name. The media, which had once painted him as a villain, now found itself drawn to his every move. Trump had always been a master at commanding attention, and this time he was using it to his full advantage. In the background, his team was quietly working on strategy. They understood the political landscape had shifted. Trump wasn't running in 2016 anymore. He was running in a completely different America. His team worked tirelessly to craft his message, focusing on issues like immigration, the economy, and national security. But this time, there was a new urgency, a desire to restore what many saw as the soul of America. It was clear that Trump was not just running to win, he was running to change the country once again. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party scrambled to figure out how to respond to Trump's return. Many had expected Biden to run for a second term, but whispers about his age and the state of the country began to circulate. It wasn't long before the party started to show signs of internal division. Who could challenge Trump in 2024? Was it time for a fresh face, or would they go with the status quo? The uncertainty created by Trump's announcement put pressure on the Democratic Party, and it was only a matter of time before they were forced to choose a side. The media played a huge role in fueling the drama. The Trump campaign was surrounded by controversy, with accusations of racism, misogyny, and corruption. Trump, however, was no stranger to this kind of media firestorm. He embraced it, often using the headlines to his advantage. Each story, each negative headline only solidified his image as the outsider, the man who would take on the system and bring real change. As the campaign picked up momentum, the stakes grew higher. Trump had already made history once by becoming the first president to be impeached twice. Could he make history again by returning to the White House despite all the challenges? Would his supporters rally behind him once more, or would the political climate of 2024 prove too much? The stage was set. The battle for the White House was about to begin, and Donald Trump was once again at the center of it all. As the nation braced for the election ahead, one thing was certain. Trump's comeback was going to be anything but ordinary. The drama, the uncertainty, and the stakes were higher than ever before. The question remained, would America embrace its most unconventional president once again, or was this the end of the Trump era? Only time would tell. The news of Donald Trump's return to the political stage was met with disbelief. It wasn't just his critics who were stunned, but even some of his former supporters. After his shocking loss in 2020, Trump had retreated from the spotlight, surrounded by legal battles, public criticism, and a fractured reputation. Many thought he was done for good, a politician who had burned out and lost the battle for the future of the nation. Yet in 2024, he surprised everyone by announcing that he would be running for president once again. But this time, things felt different. Trump wasn't the same man who had swept through the 2016 election, full of brash confidence and unrelenting energy. He had been humbled by the aftermath of his loss. He had spent years fighting legal battles, dodging allegations of corruption, and facing multiple court cases. The Trump of 2024 wasn't just a former president. He was a man with scars from a political war that had left deep marks on his reputation. His campaign wasn't an immediate success. The first few months were rocky. Trump was not the candidate that people remembered. His speeches were more measured, less fiery. The crowds were smaller, the excitement not quite the same. Many wondered why Trump had returned. Was it pride? Was it to salvage his legacy? Or was it something deeper, something that few truly understood? To those close to him, it was clear. Trump wasn't simply running for office again out of vanity. He had a mission, to reclaim his vision for America, to take back what he believed was rightfully his. The years after his presidency had only deepened his belief in the cause. He believed that America had lost its way and that he was the only one capable of returning it to greatness. But it wasn't about politics anymore. It was personal. Trump's announcement came with a promise to the forgotten working-class Americans, those who felt that their voices had been drowned out by the political elite. His return wasn't just about regaining power. It was about reasserting the values that he believed made America strong in the first place. For Trump, it was a chance to restore his brand of American exceptionalism, the vision that had won him so much support in his first term. He was more than just a politician. He was a symbol of defiance against the establishment. The early days of his campaign were defined by doubt. His legal battles continued to haunt him, and some saw his return as a desperate grab for relevance. His critics said that he had lost his touch, that his controversial statements and reckless behavior in the past had finally caught up with him. Even some of his former allies questioned his ability to win back the presidency. Would America, tired of his tumultuous first term, truly want him back? But Trump didn't back down. He embraced the challenge. His strategy was simple. Double down on everything that had made him successful before. He continued to stir the pot, make bold statements, and attack his opponents. His rallies, though smaller at first, began to grow. His followers, devoted, loyal, and vocal, were once again rallying behind him. They believed in him, not just as a leader, but as a savior who could return America to its former glory. The media, ever the adversary, played a huge role in his resurgence. The more they attacked him, the more his base rallied behind him. Trump had always known how to use the media against him. He wasn't just a candidate. He was a master at creating chaos and commanding attention. Every headline, every tweet only served to amplify his message. The more the media portrayed him as a villain, the more his supporters saw him as a victim of the system. He became a hero in their eyes, a champion fighting for the people who had been ignored by the political elites for too long. But Trump's return wasn't just about rebranding his image. It was about rebuilding his message. In 2016, his slogan had been, "Make America Great Again." In 2024, it was, "Save America." It was a direct response to the disillusionment many Americans felt after his first term. The world had changed, and Trump knew he had to adapt. He couldn't just be the same fiery, brash figure he had been before. He had to appeal to a new generation of voters, those who were tired of the establishment and wanted someone who would shake things up once again. The key to Trump's resurgence lay in his ability to tap into the emotional core of the American people. He wasn't just offering policies, he was offering a vision of a country that had lost its way but could be saved by strong leadership. His message resonated with the millions of Americans who felt forgotten, left behind by politicians who didn't understand their struggles. Trump promised them a future that wasn't just about political success, but about restoring the soul of America. Trump's competitors in the Republican Party weren't prepared for the storm he had unleashed. Several well-known figures had hoped to run for president in 2024, but none of them could compete with Trump's massive popularity. The Republican Party, still grappling with the aftermath of his first term, found itself caught in a battle for its future. Some tried to distance themselves from Trump, but they soon realized that doing so alienated their base. Others tried to adopt his rhetoric, but they failed to match his charisma and ability to connect with voters. As the election year approached, the stakes grew higher. Trump was no longer just a candidate, he was a force of nature. His rallies became massive again, his speeches delivered with the same energy and defiance that had fueled his first run. The question wasn't whether Trump could win, it was whether the country was ready for him again. Would America give him a second chance, or had his time truly passed? As the days passed, Trump's team worked tirelessly to fine-tune their strategy. They knew the country was divided, and they understood that every move mattered. The media, the polls, the debates, all of it would play a role in shaping the narrative of the election. Trump wasn't just running for office, he was running to make history. The country was on the edge of a political revolution, and Donald Trump was leading the charge. The stage was set. The comeback of Donald Trump was in full swing, and the election of 2024 would decide not only the future of the country, but also the legacy of one of the most controversial figures in American history. Would his return be the beginning of a new era, or would it mark the final chapter in his tumultuous political career? Only time would tell. The night of the 2024 presidential election was one that would go down in history. It was a cold, crisp evening, and the nation sat on the edge of its seat, awaiting the results that would decide the future of America. The polls had been close, but as the hours ticked by, the world began to realize just how tight the race truly was. This wasn't just another election. This was a political showdown like no other, and Donald Trump was at the center of it all. The media had already started to predict the outcome, but their predictions had been wrong before. No one had expected Trump to make it this far, especially after the chaos that followed his departure from the White House in 2021. Yet here he was, defying the odds once again, poised to make a historic comeback. As the first states reported their results, Trump's supporters held their breath. Early numbers weren't in his favor, and the media began to sound off, declaring that this might be the end of his political journey. But Trump had never been one to back down, and his supporters knew better than to count him out. His campaign had always thrived on unpredictability, and this election night was no different. Trump's base, which had been fiercely loyal throughout his first term, was once again fired up. They had shown up at rallies, donated to his campaign, and most importantly, voted. The energy was palpable in the air. In rural towns and small cities across the country, Trump's supporters were gathered in living rooms and community halls, watching the results unfold with hope and anxiety. They believed in him, not just as a leader, but as the answer to their frustrations, their anger at a system they felt had left them behind. But the fight wasn't over yet. As the night wore on, the media started to report that the swing states were still too close to call. Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan, each one a battleground that would decide the outcome of the race. Trump's camp wasn't backing down, and neither were his opponents. Joe Biden, the incumbent president, had made his bid for re-election, but his approval numbers had fallen in the months leading up to Election Day. His presidency had been marked by a mix of successes and failures, and the economy, despite signs of recovery, had not been enough to win over all voters. Trump's message resonated with those who felt that Biden hadn't done enough to address their concerns. His promises to reinvigorate the economy, secure the border, and restore America's global standing were tempting to many, especially those who believed that Trump's first term had been more successful than many were willing to admit. By midnight, the country was still waiting. The results were slowly trickling in, but they were far from definitive. The media networks were hesitant to call anything. Tensions were rising as people across the nation sat glued to their screens, wondering what would happen next. Would Trump defy the odds once again and pull out a victory? Or would Biden's coalition hold strong in the crucial swing states? It was at this moment that Trump took to the stage, not just as a candidate, but as a symbol of the political chaos that had engulfed the nation. His supporters were watching him live, their faces filled with a mixture of anticipation and disbelief. They had heard the news about the tight race, but they still held on to hope. Trump, with his signature boldness, took the microphone, and the crowd erupted in cheers. For a moment, it seemed like the entire country had stopped to listen to his words. He spoke about the future of America, about the power of the people, and about how the American spirit could never be defeated. His message wasn't just one of victory, it was one of defiance. Trump had always been the outsider, the one who challenged the establishment, and in that moment, he reminded his followers of the movement they had built together. The night stretched on, and the clock ticked down. By the early hours of the morning, some states began to lean in Trump's favor. The media was still cautious, but the numbers didn't lie. In places like Pennsylvania and Michigan, Trump had made unexpected gains, flipping counties that had once been considered strongholds for the Democrats. His supporters were beginning to believe that the impossible was about to happen. Then came the turning point, the announcement that Trump had won Florida, a critical state that would be nearly impossible for Biden to recover from. The room erupted in cheers, and Trump's camp knew that they were in the fight of their lives. As more results came in, it became clear that the path to victory was narrowing, and Trump's momentum was unstoppable. But it wasn't just about winning states, it was about the narrative that had taken shape over the past few months. Trump had positioned himself as the champion of a divided nation. His rhetoric, which had been criticized as divisive, had somehow found its mark with a large swath of the American public. The country was angry, restless, and ready for change. Trump's message had resonated with that anger, and now it was clear that the American people were giving him another chance. As the final results trickled in, it became evident that Trump had defied the odds once again. The election had been close, but the outcome was undeniable. Donald Trump was on the verge of winning his second term. For his supporters, it was a victory, not just for him, but for everything they believed in. For his critics, it was a moment of disbelief, a realization that they had underestimated the power of Trump's base and the political forces that had brought him back to the White House. The battle for the future of America wasn't over. The next few days would be filled with recounts, legal challenges, and uncertainty. But on election night 2024, one thing was certain. Trump's political career had been resurrected. Whether the country would accept his second term remained to be seen, but for now, the battle had been won. The question that lingered in the air was, what would happen next? The world was watching, and Trump's return was only just beginning. As the euphoria of Trump's surprising election win began to settle in, the country was hit by a new wave of uncertainty. Trump was no stranger to controversy, but in 2024, his legal troubles loomed over him like an unshakable cloud. While the media celebrated his victory, behind closed doors, his team was preparing for the next battle, a battle not for the White House, but for his political future itself. Just days before the inauguration, Trump found himself once again in the courtroom, facing a series of legal challenges that threatened to derail his victory. The very man who had managed to defy the odds and reclaim the presidency now had to fight to keep his title. His legal team scrambled, to keep up with the mounting cases, each one more complex and damning than the last. Accusations of fraud, obstruction, and misconduct loomed large, and the clock was ticking down to the moment he would officially be sworn in as the 47th president. The first major hurdle came in the form of a high-profile court case in New York. The Manhattan district attorney had filed a lawsuit accusing Trump of financial misconduct, alleging that he had falsified business records to avoid paying taxes on millions of dollars. The case had been years in the making, but now, with Trump poised to take office again, it took on a new level of significance. The world watched as the legal team worked feverishly to ensure that Trump could still take the oath of office. As the days passed, the media pounced on every new development, making it clear that Trump's legal battles were far from over. Even as the country's attention turned to the upcoming inauguration, there was a palpable sense of uncertainty. The question on everyone's mind was simple. Would he be able to serve as president while fighting these charges? Could the president-elect lead the nation when his freedom was under threat? The courts weren't the only battlefield. Across the country, the political elite watched with bated breath, wondering what this legal chaos would mean for the future of the Republican Party. Trump's return had sparked a wave of support, but his legal issues were threatening to fracture the party that had rallied behind him. The Republican establishment, still haunted by the events of the 2020 election, was divided on how to handle Trump's resurgence. Some saw him as the only hope for the party's future, while others were deeply concerned that his legal troubles would damage the Republican brand for years to come. The pressure was mounting. Behind closed doors, Trump was facing questions from his closest allies. Was it worth it? Should he have stepped aside and allowed a new generation of leaders to take the reins of the Republican Party? But Trump wasn't one to back down. His answer was simple. I didn't come this far to quit now. In public, he remained defiant. Trump used the media to his advantage, labeling the legal challenges against him as part of a deep state conspiracy designed to prevent him from retaking the presidency. His supporters rallied behind him, viewing the charges not as a threat to his legitimacy, but as a badge of honor. To them, it was clear. The establishment was scared of him, and the legal battles were just more proof that he was fighting for the people who had been forgotten by Washington. The inauguration day arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. As Trump took the stage to be sworn in, the cameras focused not only on the pomp and circumstance of the ceremony, but also on the shadows of the legal battles that hung over him. As the Chief Justice administered the oath, Trump's legal team was preparing for a showdown in court. A lawsuit challenging the legitimacy of his presidency was already in motion, and more legal challenges were expected in the weeks to come. The country was now divided, more than ever. While Trump's supporters celebrated his return, others viewed his second term as a dangerous precedent for American democracy. Critics of Trump seized on the legal chaos, arguing that no one with such serious charges hanging over them should be allowed to serve as president. Legal experts were divided on whether Trump could continue to govern effectively while fighting his battles in court. Some said it would be impossible for him to maintain the focus and authority required to lead the nation, while others believed he could use his legal troubles to solidify his image as an outsider fighting against a corrupt system. In the first days of his second term, Trump's administration worked swiftly to push forward with key policies, especially on immigration, the economy, and national security. Yet each new policy announcement was quickly overshadowed by his ongoing legal troubles. The press was relentless in its coverage of the court cases, and every press conference seemed to raise more questions than answers. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, Republicans were once again walking a fine line. Many were deeply uncomfortable with the legal chaos surrounding their president, but they knew that Trump's popularity with the base made it difficult to challenge him directly. The party was caught between loyalty to the president and the realization that his legal problems could hurt them in future elections. The party's leaders were careful with their statements, often praising Trump's policy initiatives while avoiding comment on his legal troubles. For Trump, the legal chaos wasn't just a political distraction, it was personal. He had spent his entire life fighting for control of his businesses, his brand, his image, and now he was fighting to control his own fate. The legal challenges felt like another battle in a lifetime of wars, and Trump wasn't one to shy away from a fight. But as the weeks turned into months, the pressure began to take its toll. His allies and enemies alike wondered how long he could keep up the fight. The battle for the presidency was one thing, but the battle for his freedom was a different story altogether. As Trump pressed forward into his second term, the question remained: could he navigate the treacherous legal landscape without losing his grip on power? Would the courts, the media, and his political enemies succeed in derailing his presidency, or would he rise above it all, just as he had done so many times before? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: the legal chaos surrounding Trump's return to the White House was far from over, and the nation was watching closely to see what would happen next. As the days turned into weeks following Donald Trump's second inauguration, it became abundantly clear that America was more divided than ever. The polarizing figure that had returned to the White House wasn't just causing a stir in Washington. His presence was shaking the very foundations of the nation. His supporters celebrated what they saw as a triumph of defiance against the political elites, while his critics feared a return to the chaos, divisiveness, and uncertainty that had defined his first term. The first few months of Trump's second term were marked by a series of significant policy changes, some of which were reminiscent of his 2016 platform. His administration quickly moved to implement sweeping immigration reforms, aggressive tax cuts, and new foreign policies that prioritized American interests above all else. Trump's policies, which had been the cornerstone of his first term, seemed to be even more ambitious this time around. But with each new executive order, the country was torn. His base, still firmly behind him, cheered on the changes, believing that Trump was finally fulfilling the promises he had made during his first term. For them, his return was not just political, it was personal. They saw him as the only president willing to fight for the working-class Americans who felt forgotten by the political elites. To them, Trump's victories were theirs as well. However, for millions of Americans who had never supported him, these same policies were a betrayal. Trump's return to power had deepened the sense of alienation that many felt under his leadership. His aggressive stance on immigration, coupled with his harsh rhetoric, had driven a wedge between different communities. The rise of nationalist rhetoric during his first term had only intensified, and his supporters, emboldened by his return, seemed more vocal and divisive than ever. Across the country, protests erupted, fueled by anger and frustration at what many saw as a blatant disregard for the values of equality, justice, and inclusivity. For those who had once hoped for a more united America, Trump's second term seemed like a worsening nightmare. It wasn't just about policy anymore, it was about the very fabric of American identity. Trump's presidency had always been marked by his combative approach to politics. But now, with the stakes higher than ever, the nation's divisions seemed more entrenched. America was no longer just politically divided, it was ideologically fractured. Even within the Republican Party, a rift began to grow. While the party's base remained loyal to Trump, a significant faction of establishment Republicans began to question his ability to lead the country. They feared that his legal troubles, combined with his inflammatory rhetoric, would only further alienate voters in swing states and damage the party's chances in future elections. Yet despite this internal division, few dared to openly challenge Trump. The fear of angering his loyal supporters, a group that had proven time and again to be a powerful political force, kept many Republicans in check. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party, still reeling from its narrow loss in 2024, found itself in a state of disarray. The candidate who had once seemed like the natural heir to Obama's political legacy, Joe Biden, was now seen as an aging figurehead struggling to maintain relevance. His approval ratings had dipped as more Americans, particularly younger voters, grew disillusioned with his inability to deliver on promises of change. The Democrats were caught between a desire to unite behind a single candidate and the reality that the political landscape was shifting in ways they hadn't anticipated. Some Democrats had hoped for a strong challenger to emerge during Trump's second term, but no clear leader had yet risen to the occasion. Progressives were increasingly frustrated by the lack of bold action on issues like climate change, healthcare, and economic inequality. Moderates, on the other hand, were unwilling to risk alienating moderate Republicans who might still be willing to cross party lines. As a result, the Democratic Party found itself stuck in an endless cycle of compromise, unable to unify behind a vision that could counter Trump's populist message. Trump, however, didn't appear to care about the growing divisions within the political establishment. He was focused on one thing: winning. And in his mind, winning wasn't just about getting re-elected. It was about cementing his legacy and ensuring that his vision of America would outlast his time in office. Every decision he made, every policy he enacted, seemed to be aimed at strengthening his grip on power and leaving his mark on history. His supporters rallied behind him, believing that his second term was the country's last hope for regaining its former strength. They saw the media's relentless attacks on him as proof that he was the only one brave enough to challenge the status quo. For them, Trump wasn't just a president, he was a symbol of resistance against a system they believed had betrayed them. Yet, as Trump's second term progressed, his critics began to grow louder. The media, which had always been critical of his presidency, ramped up their coverage, focusing on his policies, his rhetoric, and his handling of the country's increasingly tense social climate. It seemed like every day brought a new scandal, a new controversy, or a new headline that threatened to bring his presidency to its knees. One of the biggest flashpoints came in the wake of a major foreign policy decision. Trump's decision to pull American troops out of several conflict zones, including the Middle East, was met with both praise and condemnation. His supporters argued that he was keeping his promise to bring American soldiers home, ending endless wars and saving lives. But critics argued that his actions had left a power vacuum that was quickly filled by hostile foreign actors, including Russia and China. The decision became a symbol of Trump's America First approach, one that prioritized national interest over global stability. Domestically, the country remained divided. Protests continued to erupt in major cities as social justice movements clashed with Trump's hardline stance on law and order. Meanwhile, economic inequality grew, with many Americans feeling like they were falling further behind while the wealthy continued to thrive. Trump's tax cuts had disproportionately benefited the rich, while his economic policies seemed to favor large corporations over everyday workers. In this fractured environment, Trump faced the ultimate challenge. Could he unite the country under his leadership, or would his second term be defined by deeper divisions than ever before? As his presidency continued, the answers remained uncertain, and America found itself at a crossroads. Would the nation embrace his vision, or would it descend further into chaos and discord? The road ahead was murky, and the battle for America's future had only just begun. January 20th, 2025 dawned cold and bright, a day that would be etched into the history books as one of the most controversial and pivotal moments in modern American politics. Despite the legal battles, the protests, and the deep divisions that had emerged across the country, Donald Trump stood on the threshold of history, ready to take the oath of office once again as the 47th President of the United States. The tension in the air was thick, and the entire world seemed to be holding its breath, wondering what would happen next. The inauguration ceremony, a moment that would traditionally symbolize unity and hope for the country, felt more like an epic showdown. Trump's arrival at the Capitol was met with mixed emotions. To his supporters, it was a moment of redemption. For them, this day was a testament to their belief that America needed a leader who could speak their language, who could stand up to the global elite, and who would restore what they saw as the country's lost greatness. To them, this was not just a political event, it was a victory, a sign that the silent majority had finally been heard. But for his critics, this was a moment of dread. The very man who had divided the nation like no other, who had sparked protests, violence, and heated debates, was about to be sworn in for a second term. To them, it was a grim reminder that the political system had failed to stop him, and the damage he had done over the past 4 years might continue for another 4. His presidency had been defined by chaos, and they feared that his return would bring even more instability to the already fractured nation. The streets around the Capitol were packed with supporters and protesters alike, the air buzzing with chants and signs that reflected the split that had taken root in America. The media, which had often been a target of Trump's barbs during his first term, was now focusing intently on the spectacle. The world's eyes were on Washington, D.C., as America once again found itself at the crossroads of its political future. Trump's arrival at the Capitol building was nothing short of a spectacle. The cameras flashed, capturing every moment as he made his way up the steps to the podium. His supporters, who had gathered in the cold to witness this historic moment, cheered wildly, waving flags and chanting his name. For them, this was more than an inauguration. It was the culmination of a movement that had defied expectations and overcome obstacles. Trump had survived impeachment, legal battles, and relentless attacks from his political opponents, and now he was about to take back what they believed was rightfully his, the presidency. As the ceremony began, the mood was charged with anticipation. The traditional rituals of an inauguration, the swearing in, the speeches, the parade, took on a new significance. Trump's speech, which was expected to be a key moment, was filled with defiance and promises of a new era for America. He spoke not just to the American people, but to the world, reaffirming his belief in the strength and greatness of the United States. He vowed to continue the fight against what he called the deep state, promising to drain the swamp once and for all. His words were a direct challenge to the political establishment and to those who had hoped for a more peaceful transition of power. His speech was a reminder that Trump was not a typical president. He was a force of nature, driven by his own vision for the country. But as Trump stood at the podium, taking the oath of office, the country was once again reminded of the deep divides that had emerged over the past 4 years. The national anthem played, and while many in the crowd stood proudly, some simply stared in silence, their faces filled with a mixture of disbelief and anger. It was clear that this moment was not unifying the nation. It was only deepening the rift between Trump's supporters and his detractors. As Trump raised his hand and swore to protect and defend the Constitution, the weight of his presidency settled in. This wasn't just a victory for him. It was a victory for the millions of Americans who had rallied behind him, believing that their voices had been silenced by the political elites. It was also a stark reminder of the political polarization that had torn the country apart. The inauguration, which should have been a symbol of unity, had become a symbol of division. But in the hours following the ceremony, the tensions didn't subside. Across the country, protests erupted. In cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, demonstrators took to the streets, decrying what they saw as a dangerous second term for a man who had already done so much damage to the fabric of American democracy. The protests were peaceful for the most part, but there was a palpable sense of anger in the air. Trump's critics were not backing down. They were prepared to fight for what they believed was right. At the same time, Trump's supporters were filled with optimism and hope. They saw his inauguration as the dawn of a new era, one where their values would once again be at the forefront of American politics. Trump had promised to fight for the forgotten man, and for them, his return to power was proof that their struggles were not in vain. The media, always in the thick of the action, focused intently on the stark contrast between the two groups. The inauguration had shown how divided America truly was. Trump's speech, his defiant promises, and the images of his supporters celebrating his victory all added to the tension. But for many, this was the beginning of the next chapter in the battle for America's soul. As Trump made his way back to the White House, the reality of his second term began to set in. The challenges he faced, both legal and political, were far from over. The nation was watching, and the world was waiting to see if Trump would live up to his promises or if his second term would mirror the chaos of his first. America was at a crossroads. Trump had returned to the White House, but the question remained, could he unite a country so deeply divided, or would his second term deepen the fractures and set the stage for even more turmoil in the years to come? Only time would tell, but for now, Trump had made history, again. The first 100 days of Donald Trump's second term were nothing short of historic. His victory in the 2024 election had defied the odds, and now, as the dust settled from his contentious inauguration, Trump's presidency was quickly taking shape. This wasn't just a return to the White House. It was a fresh, more aggressive approach that would reshape the country's future in ways no one had predicted. As Trump stepped into the Oval Office for the second time, he wasted no time in asserting his dominance over the American political scene. The controversies of his first term had not deterred him. If anything, they had only fueled his determination. His early days were marked by swift executive orders, bold statements, and immediate policy changes that sent shockwaves through Washington and the nation. The media, which had been so critical of him during his first term, was on edge, bracing for the next round of headlines. Trump had always known how to use the media to his advantage, and now it seemed like every move he made became front-page news. From the moment he set foot in the White House, he made it clear that this term would be different. He was in charge, and nothing, not even the mounting legal challenges, would slow him down. His first executive order, signed within hours of his inauguration, focused on tax cuts. Trump had promised during his campaign that he would deliver tax relief to the American people, and he made good on that promise by slashing corporate tax rates and offering new incentives to businesses that brought jobs back to American soil. His supporters hailed the move as a victory for the economy, while critics argued that it disproportionately benefited the wealthy. Still, Trump pressed on, determined to make good on his promises. Next came a series of immigration reforms, which had been at the center of his campaign. Trump was unapologetic in his stance, reinstating the controversial border wall project and implementing even stricter policies on immigration. The move sparked outrage among his critics, but for Trump's base, this was exactly what they had voted for. He had promised to secure the borders and put America first, and he was doing just that. For many, his actions reaffirmed the belief that he was the only politician willing to take the hard steps needed to protect the country. On foreign policy, Trump quickly reasserted his America First doctrine. He pulled the U.S. out of several international agreements, including a controversial climate pact that had been a point of contention with European allies. Trump's focus was squarely on what he viewed as the best interests of the United States. While world leaders expressed concern about the impact of these decisions on global cooperation, Trump remained steadfast. He believed that America had spent too long prioritizing the needs of other nations and that it was time to focus on the country's own prosperity. But Trump's first 100 days weren't just about bold policy moves. They were about laying the groundwork for his legacy. He had learned from his previous term that nothing was guaranteed in Washington, and he needed to move fast. His appointments to the Supreme Court and other federal courts were aimed at solidifying a conservative majority for decades to come. With his base firmly behind him, Trump began to reshape the judiciary, appointing judges who shared his views on everything from abortion to gun rights. His critics saw these moves as an attempt to cement conservative control over the country's legal system, but Trump's supporters saw it as a long overdue correction. However, not everything went according to plan. The legal challenges that had plagued his campaign and election didn't disappear after he took office. In fact, they intensified. Several court cases continued to loom over him, and despite his legal team's best efforts, it seemed that Trump would never be free of the controversies that had followed him for years. But rather than retreat, he used these challenges as fuel for his political narrative. He publicly labeled the investigations as politically motivated, claiming they were part of a coordinated effort by the left to undermine his presidency. His rhetoric resonated with his base, many of whom believed that the political establishment was out to get him. At the same time, Trump's administration began to feel the strain of his second term. As the legal battles continued, the pressure on his staff grew. Some of his closest allies, who had helped him during his first term, began to distance themselves from him, concerned about the long-term effects of the ongoing scandals. But Trump wasn't interested in taking a step back. He surrounded himself with loyalists who were willing to stand by him, no matter the cost. His inner circle, though smaller than before, remained fiercely loyal, believing that Trump was still the best hope for America's future. As the 100-day mark approached, the country was beginning to understand that Trump's second term would be nothing like his first. This wasn't a man who had learned from his past mistakes. This was a man who was determined to push forward, no matter the consequences. The political landscape was shifting, and with each new move, Trump seemed to be tearing down the old guard of American politics. Whether it was his unapologetic stance on foreign policy, his tax cuts, or his immigration reforms, Trump was reshaping the country's future in his image. But while his supporters cheered, the country's divisions were only deepening. Trump's second term had already been defined by fierce opposition and stark polarization. In cities across the country, protests continued to erupt, as millions of Americans voiced their frustration with his policies and his leadership. Trump's critics, who had never fully accepted his presidency, were more vocal than ever before, demanding action to stop him. But for Trump, this was all part of the plan. He thrived on opposition, on being the outsider. He had always known that he would face resistance, and that resistance only fueled his desire to push harder. The first 100 days of Trump's second term were just the beginning. What lay ahead was a battle for the soul of the nation, one that would define the future of American politics for generations to come. Could Trump continue to hold the country's attention and lead it in the direction he had promised? Or would the mounting legal battles and growing opposition prove too much for him to overcome? The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Donald Trump was not backing down. His presidency had entered a new chapter, and the nation was bracing for whatever came next. As Donald Trump entered the final stretch of his second term, it became clear that the political landscape of America would never be the same again. The promises he had made during his first campaign in 2016 had been bold, and while some had been fulfilled, others had sparked controversy. But what was undeniable now was that Trump had reshaped the very fabric of American politics. The question on everyone's mind wasn't just about what he had achieved, but what would happen next, and how his legacy would be remembered. For Trump, the end of his second term wasn't just the close of a presidency. It was the culmination of years of battles, victories, and defeats. It was clear that the United States had been permanently altered by his leadership, and as he faced the end of his political journey, Trump looked toward the future with a mixture of satisfaction and defiance. His administration, for all the chaos and unpredictability, had succeeded in a number of areas. His economic policies had, for a time, lifted the stock market to new heights, creating jobs and strengthening the middle class. His hardline stance on immigration had built the wall that became his signature promise, and his foreign policy, rooted in an America First agenda, had reshaped the global order. Trump had shaken up the global trade system, challenging long-standing alliances while withdrawing the U.S. from international agreements that he deemed harmful to American interests. Yet, even as his achievements piled up, so did the challenges. The legal cases that had haunted him since his first term never went away. Courtrooms became as much a part of his presidency as the White House itself. As the final months of his term approached, Trump's legal battles intensified once more. The country watched as he faced lawsuits over his business dealings, his handling of the January 6th attack, and various allegations of financial misconduct. Despite his combative approach, there were still whispers about the price of his actions. Could a man so marred by scandal truly leave a lasting mark on the country? But Trump, ever the showman, turned these struggles into part of his narrative. He refused to let the legal challenges define him. Instead, he claimed they were proof that the political establishment had it out for him, and by extension, the people who had supported him. Every legal setback was turned into a rallying cry for his followers. "They're afraid of me, folks," he would often say, "because they know I'm fighting for you." In the months leading up to the end of his second term, Trump worked relentlessly to consolidate his power. His administration had spent years reshaping the judiciary, appointing conservative judges who were poised to influence legal battles long after he left office. Many saw this as his greatest legacy, one that could shift the ideological direction of the country for decades. For others, it was a stark reminder of his attempts to impose his will on the nation, even through the courts. As the country entered the final stretch of Trump's presidency, his relationship with the media continued to sour. The press had always been a battleground, but now it felt like a full-scale war. Every policy, every speech, every move he made was dissected in the most brutal of ways. The media painted his presidency as one of scandal and division, and Trump, never one to back down, fought back with his usual fervor. He called the press fake news, dismissed reporters as enemies of the people, and used his Twitter feed before being permanently banned to wage his own media campaign. For Trump's supporters, the media's treatment was part of his appeal. They saw him as a champion standing against the corrupt establishment, the elites, and the so-called fake news. He was their fighter, someone who had broken every norm to expose the deep state. To them, Trump wasn't just a president, He was a symbol of rebellion against a system they felt was rigged against them. But as Trump neared the end of his term, his critics began to ask a deeper question. What would America look like without Trump in the White House? Would his influence persist even after his departure? The answer, it seemed, was yes. Trump's imprint on the Republican Party was undeniable. Despite losing the presidency in 2020, his influence remained unmatched. Even as the nation looked to the future, many Republican candidates were still guided by Trump's rhetoric and ideology. His legacy lived on not just in policy, but in the way he had forever changed the way politics were practiced in America. For many, the question of Trump's legacy was deeply tied to what would come after him. Would his supporters continue to shape the nation's political discourse, or would the country finally move on from the divisive rhetoric he had championed? The battle for the soul of America was far from over, but it was clear that Trump had forever altered its course. In his final months, Trump also began to shift his focus to the future of his movement. He talked about his plans beyond the presidency, his potential involvement in future elections, his influence over Republican candidates, and his role as the leader of the people. Even in his final days, Trump was working to secure his place in the history books as the man who had brought America back from the brink. Meanwhile, as the American people looked toward the future, they were faced with a question. Could they heal from the divisions that Trump had stoked, or was his legacy one of permanent fracture? The country had never been so divided. In every city, in every town, Americans were on opposite sides, fighting over what they believed America should be. The answer to that question would depend on who succeeded him and how they chose to lead. But one thing was certain. The era of Trump had changed everything. As Trump prepared to leave office, the question of what would come next loomed large. Would America embrace his vision of a strong, independent nation, or would it seek a return to a more traditional form of leadership? Could the nation find unity after 4 years of political warfare, or would Trump's legacy be one of perpetual division? In the end, Trump's presidency would be remembered as one that had broken the mold. He had fought for his vision of America with unmatched tenacity, and his legacy would be debated for years to come. Some would see him as a hero, others as a villain, but no one could deny that his time in office had been one of the most consequential in modern American history. Whether America would find peace or continue to fight over the direction of the nation, one thing was clear. The Trump era had left an indelible mark on the nation and the world.